Seed plants are the most recently evolved plants and the type of plant that most people are familiar with. So most of the plants that you think of, trees and flowers and all that, are seed plants. They did evolve from their ancestors, seedless vascular plants like the lycophytes or the pteridophytes. The seed plants include two major groups, the gymnosperms and the angiosperms. Okay, and so as the name implies, one of the major innovations of the seed plants is the seed. So their major critical innovations, again, the seed there is a big one, but there's actually four major traits that are shared by all seed plants today. Pollen. Pollen is the male gametophyte. It's going to allow the seed plants to disperse that male gametophyte. And the big advantage to this is that the sperm will not need external water. Okay? Remember that the pteridophytes, the lycophytes, and the non-vascular plants all had to have external water for their sperm to travel in. That won't be true for the seed plants because the pollen will carry the sperm to the female. Ovules are a related structure. It's a structure within a plant that contains the female gametophyte, and it's where the embryo will form. And so it provides protection and nutrition to the female gametophyte and the embryo. The seeds contain the embryo, and so they form inside of ovules, and they will harden and protect the embryo for a period of time. So, for example, many seeds will finish forming at the end of the summer or early fall, and then those seeds remain dormant and protect the embryo until the spring, when the embryo starts to grow again, when it starts to warm up and be moist. And then the fourth major innovation that is shared by modern seed plants is wood. Wood provides strength to plants, so it's kind of structural support that we talked about for vascular plants, but it's much more rigid, and so it allows seed plants to be much taller than the other plant types and produce many more branches, leaves, and that allows more seeds, right? So higher reproductive success. I just want to say a word here. Remember that when we say wood, we're really talking about woody tissue. Sometimes we have a perception in our mind of wood being like the trunk of a tree, but plants like roses and shrubs, they also have wood. It's just not as thick and dense as a tree trunk. So the other interesting thing about wood is that when you look at the fossil record, it actually occurs before seeds. And so there were plants called progymnosperms that had wood but didn't make seeds. But today, all of the wood-containing plants are seed plants as well. So wood is, like I said, a specialized tissue. It's not just a tree trunk. It contains water-conducting cells. It has lignin. So those allow the water to be transported long distances. So if you're thinking about a tree that's hundreds of feet tall, it has to move water from the roots all the way to the top of the soil. And so wood is really good at conducting water. It provides structural support. So again, in its thickened, really rigid forms, you can have a trunk that's, very yards wide, meters wide, and again, hundreds of feet tall. So there's a lot about the structure of wood that we're not going to get into all the detail, but there is something called the vascular cambium that is sort of the part of the wood that is regenerative. So it produces thick layer of wood on the interior, the thin layer of the inner bark, and then it's actually the inner bark that can transport watery solutions of organic compounds. So this is how it doesn't just transport water, but it also transports sugar and things like that throughout the plant as well. And so again, wood is not just this dead stuff that we sometimes think of as like a trunk of a tree after it's cut down. It actually has fluids moving through it when it's alive and healthy that help the plant survive. Okay, pollen and ovules are related to reproduction. So the pollen and ovules are going to have to do with the fact that seed plants actually have different types of spores. So they will make a spore that will become a male gametophyte and a spore that will become a female gametophyte, rather than just having one type of spore like we saw in other types of plants. So microspores is the one type of spore, and the microspores will develop into the male gametophyte, and that is what we call pollen. So the structure that will contain the male gametophyte is called a pollen grain, and inside of the pollen grain will be sperm. Megaspores make the female gametophytes, and within the female gametophytes, eggs will be produced. And these will be retained inside of the plant, whereas pollen will travel. The ovule is the location in the plant where the megaspore is being produced and the female gametophyte develops. And it will be actually enclosed in integuments, so that's the maternal plant structure, will be containing, wrapping sort of and protecting the ovule, and then the seed will form inside of the ovule. So having the pollen and the ovule adds sort of a separate layer to the process of the sperm getting to the egg. So in seed plants, pollination happens, then fertilization can occur. So in pollination, pollen is carried either by the wind or a pollinator like a bee or a butterfly or a bird. And the pollen then lands on the female part. So the pollen is this grain, almost like little dusty stuff. A lot of times it's yellow. You've probably maybe seen it at some point on your car or something like that certain times a year. And those grains get delivered to the female parts of a plant. Depending on the type of plant, the female parts will look different, but that pollen grain will then send what's called a pollen tube down the female parts, and the pollen tube will allow a sperm to travel to the egg. Once the sperm gets to the egg, then fertilization can occur. So pollination, then fertilization. And fertilization is when the sperm actually binds with the egg, and then a diploid zygote is formed that then can develop into an embryo. And this is all happening inside of the ovule, and then the embryo will end up contained in a special structure called a seed. So here's a basic figure of what we're going to see when we look at the life cycles of these. So you have a megasporangium that produces a megaspore, and that megaspore is going to develop into the female gametophyte. So this is the female gametophyte tissue. Remember, this is haploid multicellular tissue. One of the cells of the female gametophyte will mature into an egg. This is all contained in the integument of the maternal sporophyte tissue. And then a pollen grain will somehow get to this maternal part, or female part rather, and a pollen tube will allow the transport of sperm down towards the egg. Once the egg is fertilized, mitosis will begin, and so here we see some mitosis has occurred. So we have a very small plant embryo, and it is inside still this ovule, and this is turning into a seed. So the seed coat will harden, and this will be released from the plant. This is just taking a look at a seed, a micrograph of a seed, and so inside of the seed you actually have this baby plant folded up on the inside of there. So the baby is already existing inside of the seed, and then the seed goes dormant for a period of time. Seeds can last for a really long time, for years and years and years. But then if they reach favorable conditions, like they're put into the soil and the water's added, then this baby will start to grow bigger and bigger and become a new plant. So there are a lot of advantages to the life cycle of seed plants. Really the big thing is that they can have increased reproduction. So there's always this drive in evolution towards increased reproduction. So the sperm can get to the egg without water. So right there, that's easier for the sperm to get to the egg. Once the seed is formed, it can remain dormant in the soil. And so this allows seeds, if once there's a reproductive event, this allows the seeds to have a better chance of becoming new offspring. So again, increasing the number of offspring. There's a lot of adaptations that increase the dispersal of the seed. So think, for example, about fruit. Fruit is oftentimes tasty, and so this encourages animals to help seeds disperse to other environments, and so that again increases reproductive success. And the seed also inside of it is storing food, and so this is again going to give a kind of boost to the baby plant when it germinates and starts to grow more. So it's kind of again amplifying this transfer of nutrients from one generation to the next to improve the survival of offspring.